prophets after me, but there will be khulafa numbering many. And the order was to give your allegiance to them. This is the order of things as in Muslim history. But that order came to a halt in 1924. Okay, let's kind of move forward as we're kind of jumping to modern times. So after that, after World War I and the fall of the Uthmani Khilafat, the Muslim world was divided. And it was split up by the victors of the time. And during their plan, specifically the British and the French, and the Holy Land at that moment fell under the British mandate. And as the British had control of the Holy Land, what they did was they pumped the Jewish population into the Holy Land, right? And this served as a strategic base for them. So again, the people who were the victors, the leading states, kind of had a plan and kind of moved forward in that regard. After World War II, we have another shift in the big players that are on the field, so to speak, right? After World War II, the British and the French and the European forces kind of fell from the leading station. They still had parts in it, as we sort of noted throughout our series, and we're going to highlight further. But it gave rise to America and the Soviet Union as the leading states of the world, right? And obviously, this is known as sort of like Cold War period. So after World War II, right, the Israeli state was officially declared in 1947. Right, so it went from under the British to under the Americans. And as we kind of move forward during that time period, right after that, what happened, if you guys recall? Next, the neighboring Arab states under the British and French rule attacked Israel. But as we kind of covered in more extensive detail previously, we're not allowed to cross certain lines that were set. Set by who? Set by the leading nations, the British, the French, etc. And I mean, as we covered in a lot more detail during that period, I mean, their armies themselves were ruled by officers of other states, of the British, for example, in Jordan, etc. Let's move forward, right, really quick. So they were not allowed to cross certain lines, and via British influence, Israel preemptively attacks the neighboring states, acquiring more territory, right? So Israel does a preemptive attack, the 6 Days War. There's a quick fall of the neighboring states, and Israel expands its territory. Okay, we went over that in detail, but let's keep moving forward. So next, during the War of Yom Kippur, right, under the American behest, right, because now they are on the stage, they are kind of calling shots. Under the American behest, Egypt and the neighboring Arab states preemptively attack Israel, right? And they, as we covered during that segment, destroyed the Israeli fleet. They annihilated their tanks, their air power, etc. And in the moment of strength, what did they do? When they had the upper hand, as we talked about previously, they said that instead of moving forward to conquer the Holy Land, instead of moving forward to liberate Palestine and the Muslims in the Holy Land, they said, okay, in this position of strength, we want to work for peace, right? And that is kind of what our last previous session really centered around. Between 1973 and 1933, we covered the peace process, right? And what peace really means. Now, I'm sure many of you guys recall that, but I mean, just to kind of reiterate that really quick. And I know this is a recap, but if it's kind of going fast, feel free to ask any questions or comments, etc. But we talked about what the peace process means, right? And we talked about how peace is a state of stillness, a state of things not changing, and a state of order. Things are the way you want them. You come back to your home, and the books are on the bookshelf. The bed is made. The couches are where they're supposed to be. The toys are in their toy chest. Whatever. Things are in the state of order. And in terms of the political arena, peace means that the order that the leading states have created is intact. So we talked about how even though there was massacres going on the ground, there was death, there was killing, that from the perspective of the leading states, there was peace because the order was there. The lands that were divided for the Muslims were there. The Muslims continually got weaker, and the leading states got stronger. Their wealth increased. They were able to harness more of the resources, etc., etc. So peace, as we understand in the political sense, was achieved. So this is essentially the peace process. Okay, so that's kind of where we left off, right? From 1973 to 1933. Before we move forward, any questions thus far of everything that we've covered so far? Because if anything's unclear, we're going to be building upon everything we've sort of discussed, and all of the concepts that we've built will be used to kind of look at what's coming forward in the future. Questions, comments? Clear? Okay, alhamdulillah. So let's move forward, right? So, I mean, like I mentioned, right, as we're kind of moving forward in history now, we're getting closer and closer to our time today. And we're going to find out that actually, in terms of the larger mechanism of things, in terms of the peace process, there's not going to be as much change as we move forward, because things are working in the order that they have been set in. So that's why it's important to understand, kind of what we went into. So just as a really quick cap, we're going to hopefully try to get into the 9/11 period and maybe, the post 9/11 period just briefly. But today, again, we're going to continue on the peace process, maintaining the international order, inshallah, as time permits, seeing what that means on the ground a little bit. And as history sort of bears witness, right? I mean, when you're in that situation, it's hard to tell what's going on. But in hindsight, as they say, hindsight is 20/20. We see who stood where, what position they had, and sort of who they worked for. We're going to see again, right, that there's three types of states. Essentially, there's leading states, there's orbiting states, and there's what we would call subjugated states, right? And they, just to kind of understand it better, the first one, the leading state, they set the order. The second type of state, the orbiting state, they see how they can fit into that order. And the third state, the subjugated state, you can say, all they do is they take orders, right? So create the order, fit into the order, and take the order. So if there's no more questions, inshallah, we can kind of get into it. So we left off at 1993, right? And this was during the time when the Oslo Accords were drafted. Again, right? Who's drafting them in the background? Again, it was the Americans, the Israelis, and the subsequent players on the ground. And this gave promise of some sort of semi-autonomy, right? So you're not allowed to have a foreign army. You cannot control your foreign affairs, but you are allowed to, if you want, police your own people. Any important economic matters, we're going to leave to Israel, etc. So this is, again, the continuation of the peace process. We might kind of jump into some parts of this because, like I said, from this point forward, as you guys are going to kind of see, it is much of the same, right? So January 16, 1994. President Clinton met with President Assad of Syria in Geneva. Assad stated his country's commitment to work together to put an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict. He called for, what do they say, a new era of security, stability, peace, peaceful relations, right? Among all. So, and basically they agreed that he was ready to commit itself to the requirements of peace through the establishment of normal, peaceful relations with Israel. So we see how that trajectory play out, right? We know who these people are, who this family is, right? The family of the Assad family. We've seen that clearly today, right? That they have done, I mean, unimaginable, horrendous things, right? But we'll kind of keep it there. But so the Syrians, under the Assad family, they agree to have peaceful relations with Israel. Peace again means maintaining the status quo, maintaining the order. It's kind of funny because after they agreed to these peaceful relations, what happens a little bit more than a month later, on February 25th, 1994, the Muslims of Masjid Ibrahim in Hebron were massacred by Jewish extremists, and they killed over 100 in what was an action aided by the Israeli army. Agree to peace, continue with the massacres. Okay, we're going to see that pattern continue. May 14, 1994 is the time of the Gaza-Jericho agreement, was signed in Cairo and applies to the Gaza Strip and define an area of approximately 65 square kilometers in the West Bank, including Jericho. The document included agreement on the following: a withdrawal of Israeli military forces from Gaza and Jericho, a transfer of authority from the Israeli civil administration to the Palestinian Authority, the structure and composition of the Palestinian Authority, its jurisdiction, legislative powers, etc., the police force. So we have here, okay, we talked about Syria. They said we agree to Israeli peace with Israel. We have here Egypt, right, in Cairo. They are now taking the land that belongs to Muslims and restricting it even further, all in line of peace, right? Okay, July 25th, 1994, President Clinton hosted a meeting between King Hussein and Prime Minister Rabin at the White House, and which culminated in the signing of the Washington Declaration, which marked the end of the state of war between Israel and Jordan. On October 17, 1994, Prime Minister Rabin and Prime Minister Majali initiated the text of the peace treaty. Okay, we had Syria, we had Egypt, we have Jordan. Now they are also agreeing to peace. Peace means Israel as an entity stays, the occupation of Al-Quds, the Holy Land, stays, and the massacre stay. As long as it doesn't change the lines that have been drawn, we're okay. You know, that's what peace means. And what is important to kind of note here is, right, who is hosting these, right? It said President Clinton is hosted these things, right? So it's also an indication, right, for people that, you know, the Muslims that can think and look around, is when you are hosting something, you're sort of like the arbitrator. You're kind of like the judge. You're kind of like the person that, you know, the fighting, when the kids are fighting, they come to you. You're like the parent. You're like the person that puts a roof down and defines, you know, who can be where, right? Because that is the order. Let's keep moving forward. August 29, 1994. Again, there's more agreements, more talk, more work of peace. Let's just keep moving forward. 1994. The PLO police fire at Hamas members in the Gaza Strip, killing 12. And this was sort of like the first major example of the Palestinian Authority acting as an extension of the Israeli security services. So here we have the PLO working at the behest of Israel to attack and kill its own people. We have infiltration happening in the ground, right? And so again, what does that do? It creates more confusion. What is going on? Who's doing this, right? And sometimes as we see events unfold today, it can be very confusing. What is going on? Who's actually pulling the triggers? But right, when we keep those principles in mind, right, who are the leading states? What is the order? Things kind of become a little more clear. Whose interest is this working for? Moving forward, right? And I know we started a little bit late, so I don't have a watch on me today. If anyone can keep track of time and let me know, inshallah, that'd be good. So let's kind of move forward from there. February 2nd, 1995. President Mubarak of Egypt hosted a meeting in Cairo, bringing together for the first time those parties who had concluded peace agreements. The summit represented the determination of Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and the PLO to work together to advance the negotiations and counter the efforts of those who oppose peace in the Middle East. Now, again, we're kind of moving through this kind of quick, right? But just a couple of things to kind of note here, right? These individual actors are coming together to promote peace, right? And again, it's kind of like almost at this point being a dead horse, but peace means to maintain that order. And here's an interesting snippet, right? They also want to work together in an effort to oppose all those who oppose their peace in the Middle East, right? Now, if peace means the order that you know the leading states of superpowers to be have created, what does opposing peace mean then? If you think about it, and if you say you're going to fight those who oppose peace, what does that mean? So in this instance, opposing peace doesn't really mean that you may be violent or that you want to bring about destruction. All that means is you may threaten the power structure that has been there, right? And as we kind of covered last time, from the perspective of those that are ruling, anyone that comes to challenge the status quo is threatening the peace. So for example, from the perspective of Pharaoh, when Musa alayhi salam came to address him and command him that I'm the messenger of Allah, and he orders him to rescue Bani Israel, and he's there to shake up the economic, the political structure of the time. Guess what? This is a threat to the peace that he has diligently made, to the order that he has diligently set. And if we move a little bit before that, it was this threat of peace to his peace, that kept him up at night, right? When he was having those dreams of that, someone from Bani Israel coming to challenge the order that he had diligently worked hard to build, right? And the threat to the peace was so significant that he was willing to slaughter the firstborn, every firstborn son of the children of Bani Israel, kill babies, slaughter babies, mercilessly, because it was a threat to his peace. We talked about, again, there's a lot of contemporary examples, and we'll get to them. But the same pattern was in fact during this time that we're covering, and the world we see around us as well. Okay, that was 1994 or 1995. Sorry, February 6, 1995. The peace process begins to falter because why? There is an expansion of Jewish settlements in the West Bank, right? And they actually plan to complete 30,000 additional housing units, which obviously prompted widespread Arab demonstrations and threats by Palestinian officials to quit the peace talks. And it's funny because 2 weeks earlier to this a particular date, right, the Israelis had promised a very deep freeze, one with no nonsense, right? So they say one thing, but they continue something else. And that is the peace process, right? And that's okay. Again, because when we're looking at it from the perspective of the leading states, that's perfectly okay. You can not follow what's agreed. You can create more settlements as long as the overall trajectory is the way we want. Okay, let's keep going. September 28, 1995. The Israeli-Palestinian interim agreement on the West Bank and Gaza Strip was signed again in Washington, right? This is the place that arbitrates what is good, what is bad, what is permissible, what is not permissible. Okay. And it kind of called for a means of elected self-governing authority for the Palestinians, for the Holy Land, right? And again, right, if we're kind of using that example, right, of like a parent, right? So let's say there's two kids fighting, and they come to you, they're like, oh, there's a fight, he took my toy, right? And the parent says, okay, well, you can go to your room, but you're under my roof. You're gonna listen to what I'm gonna say. You are allowed to paint the walls what you want, but what goes inside, what comes out, it's up to me. What I allow, what I don't allow in this house, well, it's up to me, right? Again, so that's kind of what that self-authority means, okay? You don't have an army, you don't have political will, you don't have vision to expand, but you can police yourself. You have you can paint the room what you want. but you cannot build any house there. The house has been built. Okay, let's kind of continue from there. All right. September 29, 1995, the U.S. Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, Foreign Minister Perez, and Chairman Arafat convened for the first meeting of the U.S. Israel-Palestinian Committee. Okay, now what did they agree to? They agreed to promote cooperative efforts to foster economic development in the West Bank and Gaza, to explore the means to increase availability and more efficient use of water resources, to consult on matters of mutual interest, and to promote cooperation on regional issues. Sounds nice on paper, right? But that's not as we see how history kind of bears it. So let's skip forward a little bit, right? November 4th, 1995, Prime Minister Rabin of Israel is assassinated by actually a Jew, like even more extremist Jewish elements within Israel, right? And just to kind of demonstrate, right, we talked about how when we're looking back in hindsight, things become a little more clear, right? Upon his assassination, upon his death, and we covered some of this for some of the brothers that are here, but we'll get into it. There was some comments that were made. You know, there was some condolences that were said, right? So let me get into them. It was said that I grieve the loss of the brother, a colleague and a friend, a soldier who we respect and as he respected us. Rabin lived as a soldier and died as a soldier for peace. God will bless you. We are not ashamed, nor are we afraid, nor are we anything but determined to conclude the legacy for which my friend fell. He, as did my grandfather. He was a man of courage, a man of vision, and he was endowed with one of the greatest virtues any man can have. He had courage, he had vision, and he had commitment to peace. I commit before you, before my people, and before the world, myself to continue to do the utmost to ensure that we have a similar legacy. Now, I know some of us had this discussion, right? But if someone were to ask me, who do you think said these words, right? You know who I would say? I would say, well, if this was, man, this guy really loves him, man. You know, he's committed to the same mission, same vision. He's a comrade in arms. Well, my best guess would be this is a maybe like a political official in Israel, or it could be that maybe it was one of his comrades in the Israeli military force, or maybe it was a childhood friend. But to my surprise, when I kind of found this out, these are the words of King Hussein of Jordan on the assassination of the Prime Minister of Israel, right? Can you imagine that? Like, I mean, so we talked about the peace agreements before, right? These are clear indications of betrayal. However, this gives us an insight into the mindset of the people that were put on top of the Muslims, right? This betrayal that kind of makes sense in the lines, behind the lines kind of analysis is now said like in the forefront, like without any shame, right? And we'll see this pattern continue even today. I mean, so this was back in 1995. I mean, as you guys know, right? Even recently, places like Saudi Arabia, etc., have openly said, that we, accept and recognize Israel, or want peace with Israel, or want to do, treaties, etc. So again, this is a pattern that's becoming clearer and clearer as we move forward. That anyone that's kind of watching the scenes behind the scenes, the actions, like can always figure out like where do the allegiances lie. But the world we live in progressively is like they're not even ashamed to hide it. They say it blatantly to your face if you're listening, if you're looking, right? It was said in 1995, and it's said even more blatantly, more unashamedly today, right? And we'll, inshallah, get to that as time permits. February to March 1996, Hamas carries out 4 suicide bombings in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Ashkelon, with 63 casualties, right? So since 1947, 1948, since even before that, when the Jewish population was pumped into Palestine, to the Holy Land, the people, the Muslims of Palestine, the Muslims of the Holy Land, have been suffering, have been subjugated to continual peace agreements without any hope or end to their suffering. In 1996, under this pressure, I mean, they do what they do, right? They strike back in any way they can, right? So what is the retaliation? And for us that have lived in the post 9/11 world, I mean, it's kind of clear, it's very typical. It's almost the same. An emergency summit of the peacemakers is established in Egypt, led by U.S. President Clinton, including other Western and Arab leaders. The gathering announces its solidarity with Israel, with Israeli determination to fight terrorism, right? And for a lot of us growing up, I mean, it's a word that maybe at first was kind of scary, but to be honest with you, it means almost nothing. You know what it really means? It means those who are against the established order. Simple as that. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. There's an order, you oppose it, well, guess what? We'll give you a name, and that is the label, right? That's kind of given. Let's kind of keep moving forward. Any questions before we kind of keep jumping into this? We have about 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, so let's kind of move into as much as we can, and then we'll kind of get into sort of like the concluding takeaways from today, right? When there's about 5 minutes, they'll give me a heads up again, please. So April 1996. There's another massacre. The acting prime minister of Israel and a candidate in the upcoming elections launches Operation Grapes of Wrath in South Lebanon in retaliation for Hezbollah rocket attacks, right? Typical scenes that we see playing over and over and over and over again. Okay, what does Israel do? Israel launches a counterattack, and Israeli shelling kills 94 refugees at a UN shelter at Kana. The US arranges an Israeli Hezbollah ceasefire known as the Grapes of Wrath understanding. Again, stuck in the peace process, Muslims get fed up. There is minor release of frustration, retaliation, something to live, something to do. Responses, disproportionate warfare, massacres, and again, in comes the peacemakers, the dad in the situation, whatever, the parents. All right, kids, sit down. Let's continue the peace process, and continuing over and over and over. This is 1996, but doesn't it sound like it could have been yesterday? Yes or no? Okay. September 30th, 1996, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat agreed to come to Washington to mend the latest tear in the fragile fabric of peace, after fighting which began during a protest over a tunnel in Jerusalem. Again, escalation, further settlements, and then coming back to mom and pop. Okay, give it help us resolve the situation within the house that you've created, within the order that you've created. Okay, moving on. Okay, we'll kind of skip this point in the interest of time. March 4th, 1947, the Israeli Prime Minister approves the construction of a new Jewish settlement in East Jerusalem. Yasser Arafat and President Clinton both criticized the proposed settlement as detrimental to the peace process, but nothing is done. Things continue. Settlements continue. September 12, 1997, the U.S. Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, admits failure to mediate peace in the Middle East. And we've touched on her before a little bit, but we'll keep going, okay? March 24th, 1998, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, David Ber-Ilan said, the security needs of Israel must be determined by Israel alone, adding that the plan failed to require adequate Palestinian compliance with Israeli security demands. And again, more basically, we're not getting into too much details of it, but there's more talks. And Israel refuses to agree. Mom and pop, which is America, or the leading state, is still okay with it, and things can move forward. October 23rd, 1998, more talks, and again, nothing really happening. And we can go into the details of it, but still, the pattern is as it is, right? 7 September 1999, King Hussein dies. He is succeeded by his eldest son, Abdullah, who becomes king, Abdullah II. So the guy that loved the previous, one of the previous prime ministers of Israel, he dies. He's followed by his son. There's a change of face, but the order that has been maintained continues, and it is a typical cycle. Although from you could say from our perspective, the Muslim perspective, there's not a lot of peace. From the perspective of things, things are going as designed. Things are moving forward. The lines are staying the way it is. The house is in order. Okay. So for the interest of time, we'll kind of stop there for now. But basically, after this continuation of the peace process, we enter, the 9/11 period, right? And we'll just kind of keep it high level at this point. But so there's 5 minutes. Okay, so what happens, right? The leading state now is diverting its attention from the peace process, quote unquote, in the Holy Land. And obviously, as we know, based on our recent history, the war in Afghanistan is declared. Okay, the Iraq war comes up, and now attention is diverted from the Palestine-Israeli issue to these other events that are occurring. The focus of the leading state is put to creating order in these places, right? So they kind of give, there's a war of terror going on, and what happens, right? Israel is sort of like an orbiting state, right? It's dependent on, the leading state of the time, as history makes clear from the history of Bani Israel, right? So this is just a pattern that's continuing. So what does an orbiting state say? Okay, let's say there's the bully in the room. Hey, I want it this way. He's gonna be like, yeah, I want it too, right? So what do? They just parrot the same narrative, the war on terror, but they use it now to even more mercilessly deal with the Blessed Land, to deal with the inhabitants of the Blessed Land, to deal with the Muslims, right? So the war on terror is now enacted, in the domain of the Holy Land as well. Okay, now we're kind of jumping a little bit forward for now for the interest of time. But what happens again, right? 2011 comes in. Now there's another big shock to the order that has been set in place. There is the rumblings of the Arab Spring, right? That we all witnessed. These orders that were created, right? These people that are put in power, Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, Tunisia, et cetera, everything is changing too fast. Syria, with the conflict that's still going on right now, again, attention is diverted from the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and focus is here. And it's kind of interesting to notice, we might not have time to get into this exactly, but just even anecdotally, I kind of found out growing up, obviously the Israeli-Palestinian issue was always hot. It was always like an issue that's on, everyone kind of cares about, it's on the ground. But I've kind of noticed, maybe anecdotally, over the last couple of years, it almost seems like the Muslims are exhausted. They're tired of this issue. It almost seems like they don't even care, right? And again, that is one of the purposes for the series, right? The history of the Blessed Land, understanding how it got to where it is, and understanding what we're going to do with it. So for the interest of time, what are some of the main takeaways for today? I know we went through a lot of history, and if you don't remember all of it, that's okay. The important part is that we understand the patterns that are at work, how things work, right? So we can understand the world, even events that are unfolding right now, and not be, bamboozled about it, not be confused about it as much. Okay. So one of the main points is that we learn from this, right? The example of Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, etc. The rulers of the Muslim countries have betrayed the Muslims overtly and covertly, the blessed land of Al-Quds, and the cause of Islam. Now, a lot of times when we hear this, there's a lot of shock and there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of emotion. But for a second, I want you guys to say, you know what? I'm not surprised, because this is no surprise, because as we kind of went through, as the states of the Muslim world were created by removing the central authority of Islam, I mean, this is the exact structure that was created. Well, structure, creates that exact function, right? So if the central body of the Muslims was destroyed and the Muslims were split into these random sections, countries were created, and you have people that have their focus on their, country only, let's just say in the best case scenario, well, guess what? I mean, that is where their focus is going to be. Now, add to the equation that instead of even being orbiting states that care about their own people, they only care about lining their own pockets. Well, you have the situation you have. It's not a surprise. It's typical. It is expected. This is how the structure, the order is supposed to be. Okay, point number two. In recent history, there has been an infiltration from other elements, right, about the Palestinian cause, whether that's secularists, Marxists, now even like the LGBTQ community. They're like, we stand with Palestine, we stand with the Palestinians, and other forces to kind of dilute the issue of the blessed land from an Islamic issue, needing an Islamic framework to more derivatives of the peace process. Because at the end of the day, whether they're the Marxists or the secularists or the LGBTQ folks or whatever, they are working within the framework that has been created. We don't have time to get into detail of this, but inshallah, in the subsequent sessions we can. Okay, number three, like I mentioned, the Muslims seem to be exhausted by the issue of the Holy Land recently, and partly because the focus of the American order or the order to be has moved to more volatile sections, right? Where order is, where things are chaotic, right? Where things are not falling in line, whether that's Syria or Egypt or Tunis or Afghanistan, etc. Again, there's a lot to expand there. Why would Muslims just follow what's going on? Does that have to do with the mentality of Bani Israel, etc.? Inshallah, we can get into that as time permits later or in the Q&A. Okay, number four. The solution to the issue of the blessed land is one word that I used maybe so much in this was order, right? The solution to the blessed land is to return to the natural order of Islam, where the Muslims have a central body, rule independently, and create and manifest their own destiny, as was done during the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the subsequent the order that he created, right? And I don't know how much time we have left, but I mean, we are sitting today, living today in the month of Muharram, where the Islamic year began, right? And you have to ask yourself, why was this chosen? As I'm sure many of you know, it was okay. Well, in the interest of time, we're not gonna get into that. Maybe in the Q&A, but I mean, I'll just say it really quick. Okay, I know we're over time a little bit, but because it marked the time of Jahiliyyah to this time of Islam, it marked the transition from the order of chaos, Jahiliyyah, to the order of the natural order, the order of security, the order of peace, the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was a shift in order that continued all the way to the times of 1924 or the times of the Uthmanis, right? There was an order in place, right? So it's about getting back to the natural order. And also the blessed land finally plays a huge role in the future of this order, right? And there's a couple of things I want to share from, a couple of hadiths I have to do with Al-Quds, but inshallah we will give to tomorrow. But just to give a sneak peek, right? even though there are many things that seem seemingly hopeless, right? But we know, when Allah wants and the will is there, and the obedience is there, things change very quickly, right? So the Holy Land, again, will play a very pivotal role, inshallah, in the future. And why exactly that is, we'll get to, in the future, inshallah. So we can probably cut it here and then open it to the Q&A, and inshallah, if there's any questions or comments,